who you are, when no one is watching. Behind every smile, every correct attitude, there might be a character shaped by fear, a desire for acceptance, and an aversion to rejection. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask you created to survive and perhaps forgot to take off. Today, let's tear off that mask and discover what lies behind the mirror. 1. The mirror and the first confrontation with the self. When someone looks in the mirror, the reflection can reveal more than just a face. There, behind the eyes, is a silent invitation to the hardest confrontation that exists: meeting your own self. For many, this moment is avoided. Not because they can't stand their appearance, but because they sense that if they look deeply, they might find truths they don't want to face. The mirror is direct, it doesn't beautify, it doesn't hide, it just shows. And what it shows is often what we try to camouflage beneath layers of adaptation. It is at this point that the persona emerges, the psychological mask we wear to move through the world. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, described the persona as a social role, a set of behaviors, expressions, and reactions shaped to be accepted. But this mask doesn't appear out of nowhere. It forms as a survival strategy, a shield to protect our essence from external demands. However, over time, it stops being just a tool and begins to occupy the place of the face itself. Most people live for years, sometimes their whole lives, believing they are this mask, believing that what they show is all there is. But there is a restlessness that escapes, a feeling of falseness or emptiness hard to explain. It is the true self trying to emerge, suffocated by the constructed image. The first step toward freedom is simple yet terrifying. Stop, truly look at yourself and ask, who am I without this mask? And have the courage to hear the answer. 2. Persona, the mask of social acceptance. The persona, according to Jung, is a necessary adaptation. We can't live in society without adjusting who we are to the group's norms. We need roles, as children, co-workers, professionals, friends. Each role requires a slight adaptation, a different mask. And that's okay. That's not being fake, it's being functional. The persona is the filter we use to be understood in different contexts. It organizes our way of existing in society. But the problem starts when we forget it's just a filter. From a very young age, we're taught to please, to be good boys and girls, to not make noise, to hide what we feel to maintain harmony. We learn that certain parts of us aren't welcome: anger, sadness, boldness. These parts are repressed, and in their place rises the persona, polite, adjusted, pleasant. But behind it is a complex human being, full of contradictions, desires, and fears that don't disappear just because they're ignored. They only retreat into the shadows of the mind. The persona then becomes a silent pact between us and society. A deal of, I'll show what you accept and you'll let me belong. But this deal comes at a high cost, the alienation of the true self. We start relating through the mask, not through our essence. We lose spontaneity, truth in relationships. We live to please, to be accepted, to fit in. And we forget what it means to simply be. Jung warns us, a well-made persona can be so convincing that even its creator forgets who they are. 3. Childhood and the formation of the mask. The construction of the persona doesn't start in adulthood, it begins in childhood. From a very early age, we are observed, corrected, and shaped by the eyes of our parents, teachers, and friends. We quickly discover that certain behaviors bring love, attention, and approval, while others distance us from affection and place us in positions of punishment. So, we learn to hide what we feel and show what pleases. The mask begins to form not by choice but out of necessity. The child realizes that to be accepted, they must fit into standards, often unconscious, established by the adults around them. If they cry too much, they're called weak. If they question things, they're disrespectful. If they show anger, they're reprimanded. Each of these experiences teaches that essential parts of their personality aren't welcome. So they hide them, bury them, and in their place raise a character that behaves as expected. This is the birth of the persona. The problem is that, over the years, we forget it was all an adaptation. The mask solidifies and gets confused with our identity. We start to believe we are only what others approved of. But there are parts of us, brave, spontaneous, intense, that are still alive, just silenced. Jung shows us that the path to self-knowledge necessarily involves revisiting this childhood and remembering what was left behind in exchange for acceptance. 4. The danger of identifying with a persona. The persona, as functional as it may be, becomes dangerous when we believe it's all we are. That's the point when the mask stops being a tool for adaptation and becomes a prison. When we confuse the role with the essence, the character with the being, we lose contact with the self, the most authentic core of the psyche. We begin to live to maintain an image, not to express our truth. It's a silent form of self-abandonment. This full identification with the persona creates a void. On the outside, everything seems fine. The image is intact, the social role is perfectly played. But inside, something doesn't fit. There's dissatisfaction, anguish, a sense that something essential is missing. This happens because important parts of us have been suffocated: passions, impulses, dreams. The mask doesn't fully represent us. And the more we invest in it, the further we drift from what truly matters. Jung points out that this disconnection leads to emotional illness. Depression, anxiety, and a feeling of unreality often stem from this rupture with the true self. When we live only to maintain a facade, we pay with our soul. That's why recognizing the persona as a construction, and not as identity, is a vital step. We need to remember that there is life beyond the mask. And only those who have the courage to take it off can truly find themselves. 5. Disintegration of the persona and its paths. There comes a moment when the mask can no longer bear the weight of its own illusion. The persona, under pressure from traumas, existential crises, or unexpected events, begins to crack. This collapse is what Jung calls the disintegration of the persona. It's the moment when a person loses control over the character they created, and finds themselves face to face with who they are, without a script, costume, or shield. Inner chaos sets in, and what was once mere discomfort becomes a deep crisis. In the face of this rupture, 3 paths usually appear. The first is negative restoration, the attempt to glue the pieces of the old mask back together and pretend nothing happened. The person returns to old habits, forces a behavior that no longer makes sense, and ignores the call for change. The second path is the absence of persona, a complete breakdown of the ability to socially adapt, which can lead to exclusion, isolation, and even severe dissociative states. Without any mask, the world becomes unbearable. But there is a third path, the hardest and also the most transformative: conscious restoration. In it, the person does not deny the collapse but embraces it as an invitation to rebuild. Instead of returning to the old character, they begin to develop a new persona, more honest, closer to the self. It is not about abandoning the mask completely but using it consciously. This is the journey that leads to psychic maturity, recognizing the necessity of the persona, but not being imprisoned by it. 6. The shadow, the other side of the mask. Everything the persona rejects, the psyche stores in the shadow. The shadow, according to Jung, is the dark side of the personality, not necessarily evil but repressed, forgotten, denied. When we only show what pleases, we hide everything instinctive, uncomfortable, contradictory. And the more rigid the mask we show the world, the denser and more dangerous the shadow we hide inside becomes. The shadow can contain anger, envy, vanity, desire, ambition, but also courage, creativity, and strength that were never allowed to emerge. It is the sum of everything that was once deemed unacceptable. The problem is that what is denied doesn't disappear. It lurks, waiting for an opening. In moments of stress, fatigue, or frustration, the shadow imposes itself. It explodes in actions that surprise us or manifests in illness, addictions, silent sabotage. Recognizing the shadow is an essential step toward integration. It's not about defeating the dark side, but knowing it, understanding it, giving it symbolic space. In this encounter, we begin to recover lost parts of ourselves. Jung said the shadow must be incorporated into the ego, not projected onto others. Only then do we stop being victims of ourselves, and begin to build a more authentic life, with less judgment and more awareness. 7. Meeting the shadow as a key to transformation. Facing the shadow is not easy, it's painful, uncomfortable, sometimes even frightening. But it is also the most powerful turning point in the inner journey. Jung believed that the individuation process, full psychological maturity, only happens when a person honestly confronts what they hide from themselves. The shadow, when brought into consciousness, reveals not just our flaws but also hidden gifts, stifled talents, and forgotten truths. The problem isn't the existence of the shadow, but our attempt to deny it or project it onto others. When we don't recognize our impulses, we start to see them in others' behavior. We judge, criticize, and hate what secretly lives within us. That's how prejudice, interpersonal conflict, and even extremism are born. The ignored shadow becomes a weapon against the world and against ourselves. But when we have the courage to face it, something changes deeply. We begin to see that it's not a monster, but a mirror of all that was rejected and still wants to be heard. By integrating it, we regain balance. We don't become perfect, we become whole. This is when the self begins to truly grow strong, no longer based on idealizations, but on radical acceptance of who we are. With light and darkness, strength and fragility. Without this, any transformation is superficial. 8. Individuation, overcoming the illusion of the persona. Individuation is the heart of Jung's theory, and perhaps the deepest challenge one can undertake in life. It is the process of truly becoming who you are by integrating all parts of the psyche: the ego, the persona, the shadow, the unconscious. It is the path to the self, the symbolic center of personality. And according to Jung, this process never begins comfortably. It requires ruptures, questioning, loss, and especially renouncing illusions. The greatest of these illusions is believing we are only the mask we wear. The persona, when mistaken for identity, prevents us from growing. It offers a stable, safe, socially accepted image, but empty of essence. Individuation begins the moment we dare to challenge that image. When we ask, what inside me has never been lived? What has my mask been hiding for so many years? This process is not rational, nor can it be forced. It requires sensitivity, patience, and inner listening. Dreams, symbols, deep reflection, all of this helps bring buried content to the surface. Jung said the self is not a goal to be achieved, but a state to be revealed. And that revelation happens gradually, like peeling back layers to reach the core. For this, the persona must cease to be a permanent shield, and become only a transitional tool. 9. Self-deception and the social role as a prison. The prison of the persona isn't always imposed from the outside, often it's self-imposed. Sartre, the existentialist philosopher, called this bad faith. The act of lying to oneself, believing one is only the role they play. Jung agreed with this idea. When we confuse our social role with our identity, we create an invisible trap. The waiter who lives to be efficient, the mother who only sees herself as a caregiver, the executive who defines himself by success, all are trapped in a script that limits them. This extreme identification with the persona leads to emotional fragility. The day that role is lost, when the child grows up, the job is gone, or the applause ends, identity collapses. The self, built upon the character, crumbles. Emptiness sets in. This is the crisis of, who am I now? And often we don't have an answer because we never built an authentic self behind the mask. We only fed the performance. Escaping this trap requires courage to break from the idealized self-image. We must admit that we are not only what we do or show. Life is broader than the role we play. Jung reminds us that personal fulfillment is only possible when we stop hiding behind masks and begin to live fully. The social role can be useful, but it should never replace our essence. Otherwise, we live as copies of ourselves, always performing, never truly being. 10. Digital persona and the modern void. In the digital age, the persona has found a new territory: the internet. Today, social media allows us to create idealized versions of ourselves with surgical precision. We choose what to show, filter feelings, forge smiles. The digital persona, unlike the traditional one, doesn't need to face someone's direct gaze. It exists on a controlled stage where image matters more than truth. And that makes it even more seductive and more dangerous. We live in times when appearing happy is more important than being happy. When validating ourselves through likes is more valued than listening to our own silence. This distancing from the true self has serious consequences: anxiety, depression, and a constant sense of inadequacy. After all, the further we move from who we are, the lonelier and more disconnected we feel. The digital persona, instead of facilitating human connection, distances us even further from authenticity. Jung already warned, living only through the persona is wasting the self's potential. The mask serves a purpose, but it doesn't fulfill. The image pleases, but it doesn't heal. The only way out is to turn inward and sincerely ask yourself, who am I without all this? The answer may be unsettling, but it's the beginning of freedom. Because the path to a fuller life isn't in the screen's glow, but in the courage to remove the mask and face what lies behind it. The mask may protect, but it also imprisons. As long as you hide behind it, you will never know your true strength, your desires, your essence. Jung taught us that the hardest path is also the most liberating, the path of authenticity. If this video moved you, like, share, and subscribe. Your journey beyond the mask is just beginning.